Welcome to It's Your Ego, Stupid, a show lovingly intended for millions of spiritual, intelligent, and imperfect people like you who may at times be led into ego stupidity, a lesser version of yourself and a lesser version of life. This show will give you a much deeper understanding of what ego is, what it's doing to your life, how it can weaken your human and spiritual wellness, and how you can heal in each of these areas if needed. It's Your Ego, Stupid will heighten your awareness of the intense link between your ego and spirit, your humanity and divinity, and the synergy that can lead to the best version of you and your life. Your host is Dr. Nick Martin, a licensed psychologist who has worked in the clinical, university, school, and private practice settings over the past 40 years, while serving as a therapist, diagnostician, educator, and consultant. Welcome again to It's Your Ego, Stupid. And now your host, Dr. Nick Martin.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Nick Martin, also known by some as Ego Man. Due to my intense focus on ego and how it's impacting our lives, both humanly and spiritually, I want to thank you for listening to It's Your Ego, Stupid on OMTimes Radio. I hope you've had a great week as you go about meeting the many important challenges that we all face, which during today's show will have us looking at how lower ego power contributes to difficulty in managing the various kinds of adversity we are called on to manage in our life. These are the inevitable failures, losses, and mistakes we can make owing to the imperfection of our humanity. These are the problems often of our own making, rather than the challenges posed by stressors that will be the focus of future programs. One of the broader lessons I've learned from you is how important it is to handle these things so that one can do a lot more winning in life rather than losing. Losers never seem to learn from their mistakes. This is an important life area because getting the better things out of life requires an ability to manage adversity, to manage those failures and losses and mistakes that we all can make. People with ego energy that is imbalanced, whether it's power or flexibility or vulnerability related, are often doing a lot more losing than winning in life. A lot of time they don't even realize this is happening, particularly in relationships, until it's too late. Their ego energy has disguised what is actually taking place to lose or fail at work, in relationships, in social settings, at tasks, in their health, in general, at life. Speaking for myself, I have thankfully been successful within the academic, professional, financial, marital, familial, athletic, and health-related aspects of my life. And that success has been heavily influenced by my willingness to recognize and learn from my mistakes sooner rather than later. The winners in life are those who are willing to take on past, current, and future failures, losses, and mistakes, not avoid them or ignore them or to deny them. But unfortunately, those with lower ego power, the focus of our program today, often approach these happenings as further confirmation of their weaknesses and helplessness. When they make mistakes or fail at something, be it a task or a relationship, or perhaps lose at something, they react as if it's something to be expected and something to be avoided on future occasions. The first and often only person they look at is themselves, because their deflated sense of empowerment, something I call disempowerment, often leads them to explain these happenings as mainly the result of their weaknesses, and they are very good at finding them. This would not be an easy person to be in a relationship, because when things go wrong, it's usually always their fault, and the sense of weakness can be quite unattractive if constantly exposed to it. Imagine someone wearing a sign that said, "Disrespect me, take me for granted, I'm weak." Over time, that person would become psychologically unattractive, and they might even be viewed more as a child than as an adult, leading to their partner looking elsewhere for an adult relationship. So they are heavily into self-blame, and the wrong people can exploit it. People with higher ego power or lower ego flexibility, or those with higher ego vulnerability, can enjoy the control or influence they are able to have over them. But before we go more deeply into that focus, I want to mention that It's Your Ego Stupid is a program for spiritual, intelligent, and imperfect people, just like you and me, who may at times be led by our ego into something I call ego stupidity, a lesser version of ourselves, and often a lesser version of life. Ego stupidity, rooted in ego energy, affecting relationships with our family, friends, and coworkers, which could stand some improvement, maybe a lot of improvement. Ego stupidity, rooted in ego energy, impacting our efforts to achieve, to use our potential, to recognize the service in what we are doing, and being able to experience a sense of meaning connected to our life's work. Ego stupidity, affecting our ability to deal effectively with all of the changes, adversity, which is the focus of today's program, stressors, and conflicts taking place in our life, often leading to their managing us rather than our managing them. Ego stupidity, making it difficult to grow our mind with truth, while keeping us stuck in faulty beliefs, values, attitudes, and prejudices, with many acquired nowadays from unfiltered social media, fake news on the internet, and opinion news on TV, masquerading as truth, and often suggesting that truth doesn't matter anymore. Ego stupidity, making it difficult to feel genuine, lasting happiness, while often leading us into unnecessary anxiety, anger, guilt, sadness, or fake happiness, being substituted for the real thing. And finally, ego stupidity, impacting our spiritual wellness and ability to be the love, the life, and the energy God is in our daily thoughts, words, and deeds. As you can see, there are lots of important places that ego stupidity can make its appearance in our lives, the source of which is the nature of our ego energy. If things aren't going as well as you'd like in any of these areas, you've come to the right place, because a lot of what's going wrong has nothing to do with our intelligence. It has nothing to do with the absence of spirituality. And it has nothing to do with the presence of mental instability. And has a lot more to do with our ego energy, serving as the fuel for ego stupidity. It is lives, relationships, and experiences which have taught me all of that over the past 40 years. And what I'm sharing with you in my website, books, and shows about ego energy and ego stupidity, and how we can heal it with ego medicine when and where needed. Again, thank you for tuning into It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio. During today's show, we'll be looking at the impact that lower ego power has on the way a person deals, or perhaps more accurately, fails to deal with the inevitable failures, losses, or mistakes, large or small, that happen in their life. As a quick review, people with lower ego power have a weakened or absent sense of power, control, or influence over what's taking place in their life. They can be the dependent, the depressive, or the victim that I talk about in my book, The Two Voices Within. They often maximize their contribution to difficulties and minimize those of others or other things. They are very susceptible to being told by others, often wrongly, how responsible they are for misfortune, and they often buy it hook, line, and sinker. This reflects how disempowered they are and how susceptible they are to being disempowered by others. And this is what can happen in unhealthy relationships over time. They are prime candidates to be in abusive relationships because they readily buy into their deserving to be mistreated because of their failings. These are the people who may readily apologize for things they don't need to apologize for. These are the people who can develop a fear of failure because they take a narrow view of it as mainly something to do with themselves. Does any of this sound familiar to you? Well, there are millions of people who experience these very difficulties because there are billions of people on the planet, and every one of them has an ego, just like you and me. Some of them are living in roles such as the dependent, the depressive, and the victim, amongst others, that I talk about in my book, The Two Voices Within. I want you to take a look to see if you, or a loved one, is experiencing any of the symptoms, ego stupidity, and ego impact on spiritual wellness I'll be talking about today. I want you to diagnose you, because you're the only one living you 24/7. Now we're going to take a look at some of the symptoms that indicate if a lower ego power voice is talking to and through you in your life. And here is the first one. You often think that life is giving you more than your fair share of problems, meaning losses or failures or mistakes. People with lower ego power often think they're being asked to deal with more adversity than most people are. And this is amplified by that sense of disempowerment that they are living, that they are experiencing. Here are some questions to think more about the symptom. Do you feel that life is out to get you? People with lower ego power often experience life as something that is out to undermine them, to get them. Do you feel as if you're living life on an uneven playing field, meaning that things are almost set up for you to lose or to fail or to make mistakes as things go along? Things aren't fair. Also, do you feel as if you're being set up to lose or fail? That sometimes things are just working against you. Circumstances are setting it up for you to lose or fail. And also, do you turn small or smaller problems into big or bigger ones? People with lower ego power often have a way of enhancing, enlarging, making things out to be much bigger than they truly are. When you think about these different questions and the symptom, does any of this sound familiar to you? I'm going to go on to the next symptom. You try to play it safe by not taking risks that could lead to failure, losses, or mistakes. Again, you try to play it safe by not taking any risks that could ultimately lead to your failing or losing or making mistakes. People with lower ego power often stop participating in life by avoiding situations that can lead to these very things happening. That playing it safe kind of approach to living your life. Here are some questions for you to think about regarding that particular symptom. Do you have a failure expectancy? People with lower ego power, when they begin to feel disempowered, often encounter life as if things are going to go wrong. Things aren't going to work out. I'm going to fail. Also, do you have a fear of failure? People over time, as a result of accumulating failure or perceived failure, begin to develop an anticipation of future failure, which can be referred to as fear of failure. Another question. Do you feel uncomfortable when success happens? Let's say you've been successful at something, but instead of embracing it and enjoying it, you find yourself questioning it, being somewhat unsettled by it. And this is something that is referred to as fear of success. And you might be asking, well, why would somebody have that? Well, the answer is because current success can often lay the foundation for future failure, because if you're having to take on more responsibility or challenges as a result of current success, it can ultimately lead to failure. So people with lower ego power are often suspicious of success because it is incompatible with their history of perceived failure and their anticipation of future failure. And one more question. Do you fail to try often, or do you need a guarantee that things will work out? People with lower ego power often act as if they need a guarantee that whatever they're going to get into, whatever they're going to try, is going to work out. In a way, they're asking to live in a risk-free world, a risk-free life, with none of us getting to experience that. And I guess one more question. Can you make friends with failure? It sounds like an odd question, but can you make friends with failure? People who have been successful in their life know exactly what I mean by that question, because that's something they have done quite well. They have been able to make friends with failure. In encountering it, they have been able to work with it, to respond from it, to manage it, to learn from it, and to move beyond it. But unfortunately, people with lower ego power maintain failure in the form of losses and mistakes as an enemy to be avoided. So when you think of these questions, does any of this sound familiar to you? We're going to go on to one more break before we go, one more symptom before we go to our first break, which is you often look to others to help solve your problems for you. People with lower ego power are often convinced that they cannot solve problems on their own, and they often look to others to help them solve them. So, do you ask for help that you really don't need? Sometimes people who are with lower ego power, when they're disempowered, often ask for help that they don't need, and unfortunately that only reinforces more of their helplessness when they actually receive it, but they don't need it. Also, do you often ask for confirmation that you don't need to get as far as what you did, whether you were successful, whether you managed something that would say that you can do it on your own? Also, when you're knocked down by failure, do you stay down? Now, this is something that people with lower ego power unfortunately do, is once they get knocked down, they stay down. They have a difficult time getting up. And also, when you're knocked over by failure, do you need someone else to pick you up? As if I'm going to stay knocked down by this failure, loss, or mistake, rather than getting up on my own, I'm going to need or I'm going to want somebody else to help me do it. So when you think of these different questions and the symptom, does any of this sound familiar to you? We're going to go on to our first break, and when we return, we'll be talking about reflections of ego stupidity for those with lower ego power in their efforts to deal with adversity. This is Dr. Nick. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, and I'll see you after the break.
Conscious media for conscious minds. OMTimes. Being a radio host on IOM-FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
Hi, Dr. Nick Martin here. I want to invite you to visit my website, egoandspirit.info, where you can find lots of information on ego and download your free ebook copy of It's Your Ego Stupid. Fix it to fix your life. Also, please visit the shop page where you can find each of my other books, Ego Therapy, Ego Spiritualism, and The Two Voices Within.
COVID-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
Welcome back. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, a show for intelligent, spiritual, and imperfect people, just like you and me. Now we're going to take a look at reflections of ego stupidity and when it's happening in a lower ego power person's difficulties in dealing with adversity, the failures and losses and mistakes that we all have encountered and will encounter. Some may seem strange or weird, wrong, funny, or inappropriate, but that's because you're not living in that energy. But for those with lower ego power, it often leads them to engage in ego-rooted, non-reality-based, truth-disconnected thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, affecting their ability to work with their failures, losses, and mistakes, due in part to the intense sense of disempowerment they experience. And it often leads them to conclude that the abnormal things that they're thinking or feeling or doing are normal when confronted with adversity. And like the symptoms, they can become their abnormal normal that they don't realize they're caught up in. But others often can, because they're not looking at them through that same ego energy prism or filter that the lower ego power person is looking through to see what's taking place in dealing with adversity. And these are intelligent, spiritual, imperfect, and mentally stable people, but they've gotten caught up in the web of an abnormal world of their own making due to their unhealthy, imbalanced ego energy. And they can remain stuck there until they heal the energy, leading them to the symptoms and ego stupidity. Doing this with what I call ego medicine, consisting of knowing what ego is and isn't, coming to an awareness, an understanding that ego is an energy and its purpose to help you to survive, but also understanding that your ego doesn't think, it can't think. And also that your ego doesn't have an intentional quality. It's not out to direct your life in any particular way. These are often myths that people put forth to explain what ego is and attach to their descriptions and discussions of it. A second contributor to ego medicine is tuning into our ego energy, getting a handle on the amount or volume of ego power, ego flexibility, and ego vulnerability that you're operating with. Now, this is something that people cannot do by themselves because they're not familiar with what's involved in getting into this tuning in, and that's where I come in. That's where my books, my website egoandspirit.info, and these podcasts come in. They are for the purpose of helping you to tune in to your ego energy. And then the third contributor to ego medicine is to replace ego-rooted, non-reality-based, truth-disconnected thoughts and beliefs that we created built upon the ego energy that we're operating with, and replace them with those which are connected to truth and reality, both human and divine. So the next part of today's show is going to deal specifically with this third contributor to ego medicine, which involves looking at reflections of ego stupidity for the disconnection from reality. These are the kinds of inaccurate, illogical, or irrational thoughts that people with lower ego power often bring into their efforts to work with problems, mistakes, failures, and losses. And here's the first reflection. Life is being unfair to me. People with lower ego power often come to a sense and a deeply ingrained thought that life is being unfair to me. And this is a non-reality based thought because life isn't out to get you any more than it's out to get me or anybody else. Lots of people with similar challenges, similar failings or mistakes have succeeded. So what's different? Well, the ego energy they're operating with and what you're operating with. And this idea that life is being unfair to me, people often with lower ego power experience, often feeds into other thoughts that are also non-reality based, reflective of ego stupidity, including that life doesn't want me to succeed. Life doesn't want me to succeed. Also, I wasn't meant to succeed, or even worse, I was born to fail. People often with lower ego power start to begin to think, and in some ways almost brainwash themselves into thinking that I'm not meant to succeed, or I was born to fail. And another thought that comes into play is I don't have what it takes to succeed. People with lower ego power often look at themselves and, in an effort to explain the failures or mistakes they have been making or losses they've encountered, take a look at themselves and begin to think that somehow something's lacking in them, in something that's happening, in what's going on. And this reminds me of something that I learned and I've shared with my students over the years, which is that there are three ingredients to success. One is opportunity, one is ability, and one is motivation. And when I left college, I thought the difference between the winners and the losers was ability. Well, life has taught me something different. It taught me that it was motivation. And what is getting in the way or standing in the way of our being motivated. And for those with lower ego power, lots of disempowerment is serving to undermine their motivation and their success. And also, another thought, people don't want me to succeed. In some ways, they're looking at obstacles where they really aren't. Most people don't really care about whether we succeed or don't succeed. So these are the kind of thoughts that people begin to accumulate in their head when they start to think about life being unfair to them. When your lower ego power is healing, you begin to realize that you're doing a much better job of being unfair to you than life is. But until then, when you're thinking that life is being unfair to you and all of the rest of what I've just shared, that's your ego making you stupid. Here's another reflection of ego stupidity. I'm incapable of solving problems on my own. I'm incapable of solving problems on my own. People with lower ego power have a magnified sense of their helplessness, and that's what the disempowerment does. The ego and low ego energy, ego power energy does. It magnifies your sense of helplessness, And that's what they often bring into their dealings with failure, losses, and mistakes. This idea that these things are, the sense of helplessness is amplified, that I'm unable to solve problems on my own. And this leads to often other reflections of ego stupidity, including, I have not been able to succeed in solving problems on my own. The person's recollection of their own personal history is that they have never been successful, when actually that can often be untrue. I sometimes refer to them as being poor historians that don't keep things in focus as to what they've done and what they haven't been able to do. They're sort of like a selective perception driven by the lower ego empowerment that leads them to look at the negative and miss the positive or the successes. Also, another thought that often happens is this notion of, I don't have what it takes to solve the problems on my own. I don't have what it takes. Again, the disempowerment serves to amplify the sense of weakness to do things on their own, when actually they probably have a lot more ability than they can see that they have. And one more thought, non-reality based, ego reflective of ego stupidity, is that the problem is bigger than me or my ability to manage it. So people with lower ego power often, due to their disempowerment, view problems or mistakes or failures as being much larger than they are or their ability is to manage it. When your lower ego power is healing, you begin to realize that you do have the ability to solve and manage problems if you choose to. And as I said earlier, it's more a problem of motivation being undermined by lower ego power than one's ability. But until then, when you're thinking that and all of the rest, well, that's your ego making you stupid. I'm going to talk about one more reflection of ego stupidity, which is that the problem is the problem. My problem is the problem. It isn't me. It isn't anything about me. It's the problem. And people with lower ego power often over-focus on the failure or the loss or the mistakes that they make and under-focus on how they are getting in the way of managing it. You're getting in your way of managing it and you don't even know it because you're locking onto the problem rather than on yourself and where you're coming from. And this is ego stupidity that can often feed into additional ego stupidity that begins to happen, such as, it doesn't matter what I do to fix it. It doesn't matter what I do to fix it, that they're unable to do it, or that I'm not the problem. But you are. You just don't know that you are. And when I say you're the problem, I'm talking about your ego energy is the problem. You have the ability. You just don't know you have the ability. And your low ego power is hiding it from you. And also that the problem is more important than the management of the problem. The problem is more important than the management of the problem, when in reality just the opposite is the case. It isn't the problem that's most important, it's the management or the failure to manage it. So when your lower ego power is healing, you begin to realize that your false sense of helplessness is a bigger problem than the failure, loss, or mistake which has happened. But until then, when you're thinking that the problem is the problem and all of the rest, well, that's your ego making you stupid. Next, I want to go on to talking about some specific ego insights connected to the symptoms and ego stupidity I've been talking about. These are insights that can help you to better see what's going on behind the scenes and beneath the surface when it comes to difficulty in dealing with adversity. These insights are intended to help you see more of your ego blindness and what ego is actually doing when it comes to difficulties. And here's the first one. Your lower ego power voice or energy is leading you to see failures, losses, and mistakes as happening more often in your life than they are in others. Again, this energy is leading you to see that failures or losses or mistakes are happening or occurring more often in your life than they are in others. It's leading you to a distortion of the frequency and the size of these occurrences. It's also leading you to a distortion of your perceived ability to manage them. So it's helping to shrink your perceived sense of being able to handle what you're being confronted with. It's also leading you to develop a rather ugly feeling about life in which you think that you're not meant to be a winner, that you're meant to be a loser. And it's also leading you to an ugly feeling about life in which you think you are meant to have the better things, the greater things that life has to offer within it. But you are. You just don't know it yet. So when you awaken or are more conscious of your lower ego power, you'll be able to see and realize all of this. Next insight is that your lower ego power energy or voice is why you are minimizing opportunities to encounter failure, losses, or mistakes while playing it safe. We talked about this earlier. Trying to keep yourself at a safe distance from these kinds of experiences. And this is leading you into the direction of what I would refer to as a lifeless life that's mainly focused on survival. That is, you're not really living. Living involves the kinds of things we have to do when we take chances and take risks, and we learn and manage them when the failures come our way. For you, often life is just about getting from one day to the next and trying to minimize the damage. It's leading you to avoid the use of your potential that can be used to confront adversity. So this energy is blocking you from seeing how much more ability you actually have because the disempowerment is coloring what you're able to understand about yourself. And it's also leading you to miss the joy of embracing and transcending the imperfection of your humanity, your ability to transcend, to embrace the imperfection of your humanity. And it's often preventing you from working smarter at life. It's not about being smarter. It's about working smarter. And that's something that winners have learned to do in the face of failures and losses and mistakes. They've learned to work smarter in handling them, whether it's the relationship with their partner or what's going on at work. When you awaken and are more conscious of your lower ego power, you'll be able to see and realize all of this. I'm going to talk about one more insight. Your lower ego power, voice, or energy is leading you to lean more on others than yourself when problems need to be solved. I mentioned this earlier, that people with lower ego power may tend to think they need the help of others more often than they really do. And this is often leading you to know yourself as a helpless person who is less capable of solving life's problems on your own. So when you look in the mirror at yourself, you see yourself as this less capable and more helpless person than you truly are. And that's the impact of the lower ego power energy. It's overruling the intelligence that you have, the spirituality you have, the mental stability that you have. It's also leading you to overestimate how much you need other people than yourself. It's leading you to overestimate how much you need other people than yourself. And it's also leading you to ask for help from others that you don't really need. You're asking for help from others that you don't really need. And when we keep doing that over and over and over again, what that ends up doing quietly and subtly is it's reinforcing your sense of helplessness. It's helping you to continue to see yourself as a person who is more helpless and more disempowered than you truly are. When you awaken and are more conscious of your lower ego power, you'll be able to see and realize all of this. We are coming up on our second break. When we return, we'll be looking at ego's impact on our spiritual wellness when we are experiencing lower ego power energy. This is Dr. Nick. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, and I'll see you after the break.
The Real Conscious Connection. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
If I could be you,
and you could be me
for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, a show for intelligent, spiritual, and imperfect people, just like you and me. Now we're going to take a look at how lower ego power can impact our spiritual wellness when it comes to dealing with adversity. We're going to be looking at ego's impact on the connection to the divinity within our humanity. The God within each of our being, which is one of the divine gifts that we've all been given. The lessening of our spiritual wellness involves gaining distance from being the love, the life, and the energy God is within our thoughts, words, and deeds. When ego is getting in the way of working with the failures, losses, and mistakes taking place in our lives. Each of these can be undermining our spiritual wellness by distancing us from God, the God within us, our divinity. Here are some examples of ego's impact on spiritual wellness for those with lower ego power who are failing to be their divinity. And we'll start with ego's impact on being the love God is when dealing with adversity. People with lower ego power have difficulty being spiritually well when feeling disempowered, weakens their efforts to manage failure, loss, and mistakes with unconditional, connective, unburdened, and unlimited love. Your divinity involves being healthily empowered in order to manage the inevitable adversity taking place in your life. When your lower ego power and weakened sense of control in your life prevents you from lovingly working with all of the adversity that life will bring, you're not able to be the unconditional love God is in managing these important life challenges. We must bring unconditional love to our efforts to manage failures, losses, and mistakes. The incredible power of your divinity can then come forth through your humanity. When your lower power and disempowerment weakens meeting and embracing life's adversities with love rather than fear and avoidance, you're not being the connective love God is. We must lovingly be connected to our failures, losses, and mistakes in order to meet them with the incredible empowerment of our divinity shining forth within our humanity. When your lower power and disempowerment are burdening you with the absence of love in working with your failings, you're not able to be the unburdened love God is. We must know and accept our failings in order to bring freely flowing love to our efforts to work with them. when your lower power and disempowerment are limiting the availability of love in working to understand and manage your failures, losses, and mistakes, you're not being the unlimited love God is. The embrace and compassion for our failings will bring forth an unlimited love to our efforts to manage and heal them. When ego is getting in the way, and all of this is happening, you're gaining distance from your spirituality, are less spiritually well, and failing to be your divinity. God loves your humanity, and you should too. Next, we'll take a look at ego's impact on being the energy, or being the life God is, when dealing with adversity. People with lower ego power have difficulty being spiritually well, when weakened needs for power and control are leading them to dishonor and disrespect their failures, their losses and mistakes with helplessness and fear and avoidance. Your divinity involves welcoming, honoring, and respecting them so that you can work with and heal what has been brought forth by them. When your lower ego power and disempowerment are leading you to dishonor and disrespect your ability to work with life's adversities, you're not being the life God is in this failing. The embrace of our ability to work with failure, loss, and mistakes with our healthy empowerment will bring us to work with honor and respect in learning from them and willing and healing that must be healed as a result. And when your lower ego power and disempowerment are leading you to dishonor and disrespect your ability to work with adversity by over-reliance on others, you're not being the life God is. The embrace of our ability to work with our failures, losses, and mistakes with healthy empowerment will allow us to honor and respect them by only calling on others when truly needed. Others can serve as our keepers only when needed. And when your lower power and disempowerment are leading you to dishonor and disrespect yourself with self-blame and attacks, when encountering failures and mistakes and losses, you're not being the life God is. The embrace of our ability to work with them with healthy empowerment will allow us to honor and respect the opportunities we have in the absence of self-blame, to learn from them, and to heal what must be healed. God does not want us to reject ourselves with blame, nor should we. When your lower power and disempowerment are leading you to dishonor and disrespect the imperfection of your humanity, you're not being the life God is. The embrace of our humanity with empowerment to work with it reflects honor and respect for who we are and that which must be learned and healed. So when your ego is getting in the way and all of this is happening, you're gaining distance from your spirituality, are less spiritually well, and failing to be your divinity, in which any adversity can be managed and healed. Last, we're going to take a look at being the energy God is and ego's impact on it when dealing with adversity. This involves being able to access healing and transformative energy that's designed into your being to naturally occur when you're connected to the human and divine truth. This is a capacity that's 3 million years in the making, just as all of the other wondrous things that we have been endowed with due to the wisdom of the ages and evolution. This is a capacity rooted in our common source, be it known by you as God, Allah, Yahweh, Vishnu, Great Spirit, Source, or another I have failed to mention. People with lower ego power have difficulty being spiritually well when failing to manage adversity within the light of truth and understanding that can be found when they are not being blinded by a diminished sense of power and control over what is taking place in their life. Your divinity involves healing and transformation in which you're willing to work with and manage failings by seeking the truth and understanding that can be found when it is not being obscured by feelings of disempowerment. It involves healing and transformation in which you are taking responsibility for seeking truth and understanding about your failures, losses, and mistakes that is unencumbered by disempowerment. When lower ego power and disempowerment is keeping you from knowing the truth and understanding about why adversity is and has happened in your life, you're not being the energy God is in working with it. The increasing of our empowerment will open the door to deeper truth and understanding of the sources and contributors to the adversity taking place in our life. When lower ego power and disempowerment is keeping you from knowing the truth and understanding about your ability to manage the problems occurring in your life, you're not being the energy God is. The increasing of our empowerment will open the door to a deeper truth and understanding of our potential to bring about any healing which is needed by ourselves and others. When lower ego power and disempowerment is keeping you from knowing truth and understanding about the need to risk failure, loss, or mistakes that will inevitably come forth from your humanity, you're not being the energy God is. The increasing of our empowerment will open the door to a deeper truth and understanding of the need to take risks involving our humanity in order to truly live. When ego is getting in the way and all of this is happening, you're gaining distance from your spirituality, are less spiritually well, and failing to be your divinity. As we leave our focus on ego's impact on our spiritual wellness, please know that we often make God and our connection to God and others so much harder than it has to be. And this is what happens when unhealthy ego energy is getting in between us. God and life and we can become so much better and so much easier when we remove that obstacle with ego medicine. As we leave our focus on lower ego power and difficulty with adversity in one's life, give some thought to the symptoms, ego stupidity, insights, and spiritual impact I've shared with you. I hope what I have shared with you today will serve as a dose of ego medicine. And if any of it resonates with you, please help me to share it with others. I want to mention before leaving that you can purchase each of my books, Ego Therapy, Ego Spiritualism, The Two Voices Within, and It's Your Ego Stupid, at the online bookstores for Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Balboa Press. I end today's show with this message. The great news is that working to heal your ego energy using ego medicine by growing your awareness of its symptoms, ego stupidity, insights, and spiritual impact will allow the divine truth in your being to flow and shine through you, and allow you to fully embrace each of the divine gifts the spiritual part of healing is a given. It's part of your endowment. Divine truth and the divine gifts are part of your heritage that already exist within you. You need do nothing more to be spiritual. You already are. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. You only need to enhance your humanity with ego medicine so that all which is available to you is given. Fix your ego to fix your life, humanly and spiritually. I want to thank you for listening and allowing me to be your servant. Please have a great week and do come back to my next program. In peace and love, this is Dr. Nick saying goodbye for now.